Hey, what's up guys? It's Pedro here from newcoder.com and welcome to part 6 of building our CRUD application from scratch. So in this tutorial, we're going to be building our static HTML file that we're going to be serving to our user. So in the previous tutorials, we've created two get routes. One of them is to serve the static HTML file to the user, and the second get route is to actually get all to-dos within our database. So we're going to be focusing on this route. So to get started, I'm just going to hit Control B to bring up the Explorer. I'm going to right click, new file, and we're going to create a new file called Index.html. So now I'm just going to hit Control B again, get rid of that. And now I just want to head over to getbootstrap.com. So we're going to be using Bootstrap 4 in order to build our HTML file. So from here, you can see that Bootstrap actually gives us a starter template, and this is going to include all the CSS that we need and the JavaScript that we need. So I'm just going to copy this. Let's head back over to Visual Studio Code. And now I'm just going to paste this in here. Let's actually change the title. So I'm just going to change it to Todo CRUD Application. And we're going to get rid of our h1 tag here. So from here, let's give it a container. The first row is going to be where we input our to-do user input. The second row is going to be an unordered list, which is going to be displaying our to-dos to the user. Now from here, let's head over back to Bootstrap and we're going to get our form. So we're just going to head over to the search bar. I'm going to type form group and I'm just going to click that. And this is going to take us here. And this looks pretty good. So we have our label and we have an input where the user can type his to-dos to submit. So I'm just going to copy this. Let's head back over to Visual Studio Code. And we're just going to paste this within here. So let's actually tidy this up a bit. Now we only need one of these, so I'm just going to delete the second one. So now let's just scroll over to the right a bit and we're going to change some of this stuff. So we're going to change the example label to do. And we're going to give an ID attribute to our input field. So we're just going to change this from form group example input to do user input. And we're going to change the placeholder to say to do. Next, we actually have to create a button so that the user can actually submit. And we're going to give it a class of primary. And let's actually call the button create. Now you could call this button post because that's the endpoint that we're going to be hitting when we click this button, but I'm just going to call it create and that's going to create our to do. And before I forget, let's actually change what the label's for. So it's not form group example input, it's going to be for our to do. All right, now from here, this actually looks good. So let's head over back to Bootstrap and get our unordered list that we're going to be using to display our to-dos to the user. So from here, let's go back to our search. I'm going to type unordered and let's click the example they give us. So this is an unordered list and you can see that it has a bunch of list items here. So I'm just going to copy this. Let's head back over to Visual Studio Code. So from here, let's just move over here and we're going to paste it in the second row. So I'm just going to tidy this up a bit. Now let's give an ID attribute to our list group. I'm just going to say ID and I'm just going to call it display because this is just going to be displaying our to-dos to the user. And for right now, I'm going to leave these list items here, but we are going to be dynamically adding these list items to our unordered list. All right, so that's it for our HTML part. Let's actually start coding some JavaScript. So I'm just going to come down here and we're going to add a script tag here. Next, let's do a document.ready. So now let's actually get our HTML elements that we attached ID attributes to. So I'm just going to say const display. And this is going to be the display for our to-dos. I'm going to say const form, and this is going to be the ID of our form. And I'm going to say const to-do user input, and this is going to be the to-do that the user types in. So first off, I think I forgot to add the ID to the form. So let me do that now. So right here, we have our form. We're going to give it an ID attribute, and we're going to call it form. And we're giving this ID attribute to the form because we want to prevent default. So when the user actually submits, we're going to prevent the default action that takes place because we want to make a RESTful call to our server API. So now let's go back down here. So next, we're going to code several helper functions. So I'm just going to say const reset to-dos input. And this is going to reset the to-do user input field. Next, we're going to create a function called build IDs. And this is going to build unique IDs to give to our HTML elements. And it's going to take in a to-do document. And we're just going to return an object with our IDs. So I'm just going to say edit ID, and edit ID is going to be attached to our edit button. So we can attach a click event to that edit button. And you can see that we're taking advantage of the primary key that we get from our to-do document to make it unique. Next, we're going to code delete ID. And delete ID is going to be attached to our delete button. So we could attach a click event to our delete button. Next, we're going to create a list item ID. And this is going to be the ID of the li element within our unordered list. And the last ID that we're going to create is going to be called to-do ID. And this is going to be the ID of our to-do. So now let's code another helper function. And this function is actually going to build the template, the list item that we want to append to our unordered list. So I'm just going to say const build template. And it's going to take in two parameters. I'm going to pass in our to-do and the IDs. And we're just going to return a string that will be appended. So from here, let's actually scroll up and let's get our li element. So I'm just going to copy one of these. And realistically, we could just delete this. So now let's go back down. Let's paste this in within here. Let's delete this. Now let's give this li element an ID. So we're just going to say ID. And it's going to be equal to IDs.listItemID. Next, let's give it a row. And we're going to make each column of size 4. So the first column is where we're actually going to be storing our to-do. So I'm just going to give it an attribute of ID. And we're just going to say IDs.toDo ID. And we want to actually display our to-do to the user. So I'm just going to say to-do.toDo. Next, let's go back to the last column. So I'm just going to give this an additional class. And I'm just going to call it, say, text to the right. So we want our buttons to be to the right of this. And we're going to have 2 buttons within here. So I'm just going to say button type equal to button. We're going to give it a class of secondary. And we're going to give it an attribute of the ID that we created. And the button is just going to say edit. So now that we have our edit button, let's copy this. And now it's time to make our delete button. So we're going to change this from secondary to the danger class. And we're going to change IDs to delete ID. And the name of our button is going to be called delete. Well, let me just take a look at this to make sure I typed out everything all right. And this looks good. And the last helper function that we're going to be coding is called display to-dos. And that's actually going to display our to-dos to the user. So I'm just going to say const display to-dos. And we're going to pass in data. And this data is going to be an array of to-dos. So I'm just going to say data.for each. And we're going to get a to-do out of each of these. Next, let's get the IDs of each to-do. So I'm just going to say let IDs equal build IDs. And we're going to pass in our to-do. Next, let's actually append each of these list items to our unordered list. So I'm just going to say display.append. And we're going to call the build template method that we just created. And we're going to pass in our to-do and our IDs. Afterwards, we're going to call our edit to-do function. Now we haven't created this function yet, and we'll do so in the next tutorials, but basically the edit to do function and our delete to do function is going to add a click event to our edit button and our delete button. I'm just going to say to do, and we're going to pass in IDs dot to do ID and IDs dot edit ID. And likewise, we're just going to say delete to do, and we're going to pass in our to do, our IDs dot list item ID, and IDs dot delete ID. So let's add a semicolon here. And this is pretty much where I want to leave you guys at. So we created our HTML file, and we've added all our helper functions that's going to help display our data to the user. And in the upcoming tutorials, we're actually going to be using the fetch API to make requests to our server.